My husband signed his name for me. 3 days later, he wasn't there to tell me why. Then the bank called, and that's when my nightmare began. If you want to hear how I fought to save my home and expose the truth, subscribe to Stories Her Heart Holds and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I want to know how far this story reaches. I know how that sounds. Let me explain. Ernest and I had lived in Spring Creek for over 40 years, and our life was the kind of quiet most people only dream of. Morning coffee on the porch, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery down the street, neighbors waving as they walked their dogs. Everything seemed safe, predictable, until that one week in October. It started innocently enough. Ernest pulled some papers out of the drawer one morning while I sipped my coffee. He said, "I need you to sign these," his voice calm but insistent. "Just some mortgage stuff. I'll handle it for both of us. It's easier this way." I frowned. "Mortgage stuff?" "Yes," he said, smiling gently. "Nothing for you to worry about. I just want to make sure it's all taken care of." I trusted him, of course. He'd always looked out for me, making sure I never had to stress about bills or paperwork. So I signed, thinking it was routine, thinking it was nothing. 3 days later, Ernest was gone. The call came in the early afternoon. I remember the way the nurse's voice on the other end made the room spin. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm so sorry. Your husband..." And I knew before she finished that something was irreparably wrong. The man who had always been my anchor, who had laughed and teased and argued and held my hand through decades, was gone. I came home, still in shock, and that's when the bank called. "Mrs. Hayes, we need to discuss your mortgage account. There are discrepancies with your filings," said a woman whose tone left no room for argument. I froze, gripping the phone like it was a lifeline. "Discrepancies?" I whispered. "My husband, he signed everything for me. I didn't touch the paperwork." "Ma'am," she said, "there are loans on this property that don't match either your husband's or your signature. We need to review them immediately." I dropped the phone. My hand shook. My coffee sloshed over the edge of the cup, but I didn't notice. The words loans, don't match, review immediately were a blur, except for the sinking realization that I had no idea what had happened. That's when it hit me. Signing those papers. I had no idea what I'd just agreed to, and Ernest wasn't there to explain. Over the next few days, I sifted through stacks of paperwork he had left behind. Each document seemed to mock me. Loan agreements with strange names, withdrawals to accounts I didn't recognize, letters marked urgent, threatening, official. I clutched them to my chest as if they could somehow give me answers that Ernest never would. Then I noticed something that made my heart stop. The signatures. They looked like Ernest's. They looked like mine. But they weren't ours. Not really. Someone had forged them, clever enough that a casual glance would never reveal the lie, yet unmistakable once you studied the strokes. Someone had taken advantage of our trust, of Ernest's absence, and had been secretly borrowing against our home. I tried calling my sons, Charles and Henry, hoping for some explanation, some reassurance, but each conversation ended the same way. Avoidance, excuses, a hint that I was asking too many questions. "Mom, it's nothing to worry about," Charles said once, tapping his fingers against the counter. But I could hear it in their voices, the tension, the unease. I didn't like it. Not one bit. That first night alone after Ernest's funeral, I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the ceiling. The wind rattled the old window panes, and I thought I could hear whispers, though I was alone. My chest felt tight, heavy with grief, but beneath that, a sharper fear had begun to root. Something had been done in the shadows of my life, and I was left to pick up the pieces. I realized then that the quiet life I had loved, the routine and comfort of decades, was gone, replaced with letters, threats, forged signatures, and the looming possibility of losing the house Ernest and I had built together. My grief had turned into a puzzle, one I was determined to solve. And the truth I knew was waiting for me. Somewhere in those papers, in those bank accounts, in those forged signatures. but uncovering it would take courage I wasn't sure I had, and it would put me face to face with a betrayal I couldn't yet imagine. The wind outside picked up, rattling the porch roof as I sat clutching the first letter from the bank. I knew that this was just the beginning. Whoever did this, whether a stranger, a friend, or worse, my own family, was going to regret it. Because I wasn't going to let Ernest's death be the end of our story. I was going to fight, no matter what it took.
The next morning, I couldn't sleep. My hands were still trembling from the call with the bank, and my mind refused to quiet itself. I wandered to the kitchen, lit only by the weak morning sun sneaking through the blinds, and poured myself another cup of coffee. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, but somehow it felt deafening. I kept thinking about Ernest, about that simple trust I'd placed in him when I signed those papers. And now, nothing felt safe anymore. I opened the drawer where Ernest had kept the documents. There they were, neatly stacked, stamped, official-looking, but as I sifted through them, a cold realization settled in. Something was very, very wrong. The first paper I picked up was a notice from the bank, marked urgent. My husband's name was signed at the bottom, but the signature, it didn't sit right. I traced it with my finger, the ink raised slightly on the page. I had seen Ernest sign hundreds of times, but this was different. The loops were too perfect, the slant slightly off. And then I saw it. My own name signed on a loan I never applied for? I gasped and dropped the paper. Coffee splashed onto the counter, but I didn't care. My hands shook as I picked it up again. I could barely read the numbers, the loan amount far larger than anything we'd ever discussed. And it wasn't just one loan. There were two more, each with my signature and Ernest's, each one completely foreign to me. I tried to reason with myself. Perhaps it was a clerical error, a mistake the bank would correct once I explained. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The handwriting was too precise, too deliberate. Someone had forged these signatures, and it wasn't an accident. I spent the morning going through old bank statements, receipts, and canceled checks. The more I looked, the clearer it became. Large sums of money had been withdrawn from our accounts and transferred to names I didn't recognize. Payments had been made on these mysterious loans, and no one had thought to tell me? My stomach twisted. Who would do this, and why? The thought that it could be someone I trusted, someone close, made my chest tighten. I had always believed that family was sacred, that our home, our sanctuary, was safe, but these papers were screaming otherwise. I called the bank again, my voice shaking. There are loans here that I never authorized. My husband, he's gone. I don't understand. Can you tell me who signed these? The woman on the other end hesitated. Ma'am, the signatures match your records, or at least very closely, but we'll flag it for review. Someone from the fraud department will call you. I hung up, my hands shaking. The house felt too quiet, too empty. I walked to the porch, hoping the familiar view of the street would calm me, but it didn't. My eyes kept returning to the mailbox. What if more letters were waiting there? More threats, more lies? I couldn't sit idly by. I needed answers. I began making a list. Every loan, every transaction, every suspicious withdrawal, names, dates, amounts, all carefully noted. And then I noticed something else. On a few documents, there were initials in the corner, faint but deliberate, like someone was marking their work. Someone wanted to leave a signature behind, a proof that they could manipulate us and get away with it. The more I dug, the more I felt a creeping sense of betrayal. I thought of my sons, Charles and Henry. Could they be involved? It seemed impossible, yet impossible is exactly what I had to consider. I remembered small hints over the past months, defensive answers, moments when I asked questions and they shifted uneasily. My stomach twisted. Could they really have done this? I called Charles first, trying to sound calm. I asked, "Have you seen these loans? Do you know anything about them?" There was a pause, a long one. Then his voice, a little too casual. "Mom, don't worry about it. The bank will sort it out. You've got enough on your plate." I swallowed hard. Something in that tone, it wasn't concern, it was avoidance and fear. Next, I tried Henry. "Henry, these loans, they're not ours. Someone forged our signatures. Do you know anything?" "Mom, stop. You're overthinking this. We'll figure it out. Don't call us about every little thing." Every little thing. That's how they dismissed it, as if the theft of our home, the manipulation of our finances was trivial. I realized then that I couldn't trust them, or really anyone. I had to find proof for myself. Every receipt, every document, every bank statement would be scrutinized. I would uncover the truth no matter how long it took. Hours passed. I sat at the table, surrounded by piles of papers, highlighters, pens, and notepads. My coffee had gone cold, my hand cramped from writing notes and marking suspicious items. And yet, I couldn't stop. Every line of numbers, every date, every name, I traced them again and again, hoping I was wrong, hoping it was just a mistake, but deep down I knew I wasn't. Then the phone pinged. Another letter from the bank had arrived. I tore it open and froze. Another loan, another amount I didn't recognize, another signature that looked like mine but wasn't. I sank into my chair, staring at the paper, realizing that this was bigger than I had imagined. Someone had been systematically taking advantage of me, of Ernest, of our trust. And if they could do this once, they could do it again. That's when I made the decision. I couldn't wait for answers from the bank, or from anyone else for that matter. I needed a professional, someone who could trace these signatures, someone who could uncover the truth hidden in ink and numbers. I needed a private investigator. But even as I thought this, a chilling question crept in. What if the trail led somewhere I didn't want to go? What if the people responsible were closer than I dared imagine? The wind rattled the window as I sat there, papers spread out like a battlefield before me. I had entered a war I didn't ask for, in a house that had once felt like a sanctuary. And the first skirmish had already begun. The discovery of loans, withdrawals, and forged signatures. And I wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. I stayed up that night, staring at the stack of papers before me. Each one seemed innocuous at first glance. Official-looking documents, neatly typed letters, numbers and dates that would normally make little impression. But as I traced the lines and checked each signature, a pattern emerged, one that made my stomach knot and my chest tighten. It wasn't just one or two loans. There were at least half a dozen, all signed in what appeared to be Ernest's hand and mine. Someone had forged them so expertly that a casual glance would never have revealed the truth. But I had spent decades with Ernest, and I knew the subtle quirks of his signature, the slight tilt, the curve of his E, the pressure on the pen at the end of each stroke. These were close, yes, cleverly close, but wrong. Not his, not mine. I picked up my old checkbook, hoping against hope that this might all be a misunderstanding. As I flipped through canceled checks from the past year, I realized the truth was far worse. Large sums had been withdrawn from our accounts and sent to names I didn't recognize. Some transfers were small, almost casual, while others were substantial. Enough to make me question how anyone could have done this without notice. And yet, no one had. I felt the walls of the house closing in. My sons' voices replayed in my mind, the way they had brushed off my questions when I had first asked about these loans. "Don't worry about it, Mom. It's nothing to be concerned with." Their casual avoidance now struck me for what it was: guilt, hiding behind polite words. I called the bank again, my voice trembling. "There are multiple loans here and I never authorized them.
My husband, he's gone. I need someone to review this immediately." The woman on the other end hesitated, then said, "Ma'am, we'll flag your account for review. Someone from the fraud department will be in touch." I hung up, my hands shaking. It wasn't enough. Someone had taken advantage of my grief, my trust, and my absence of knowledge about the paperwork. And the person responsible was close enough to know how to manipulate both Ernest and me. I spent the next several days combing through every piece of mail, every document, every old ledger Ernest had kept. Each discovery deepened my anxiety. Some loans had been paid off in part, others had accumulated interest. Someone had been careful, methodical, deliberate. They weren't reckless. They knew exactly what they were doing. And then I found something else, something that made my heart nearly stop. On several documents, there were initials in the corner, faint but deliberate, like a signature left behind in arrogance. Someone wanted to show that they could manipulate us, that they could take our home and vanish into the background of our quiet town. I couldn't sit still. I paced the porch for hours, the chill of the early morning brushing against my skin. The neighbors passed by, waving politely, oblivious to the storm brewing inside my home. I felt isolated, trapped between grief and suspicion, desperate for answers. I thought of Charles and Henry again. Could they have done this? My mind recoiled at the possibility, but I couldn't ignore the facts. Their defensiveness, the way they avoided questions, the faint glances when I mentioned the documents, it all added up. And if they were involved, it wasn't just theft. It was betrayal. A betrayal that cut deeper than anything else I had ever experienced. I decided to confront them, cautiously. I needed to see their reactions firsthand. But before I could make the call, another letter arrived. I opened it with trembling hands. Another loan. Another signature I hadn't authorized. Another amount I couldn't comprehend. I sank into the chair, my chest tight, my fingers trembling as I held the paper. The reality was unavoidable. Someone was systematically taking advantage of me, of Ernest, of the trust that had defined our lives. The quiet, predictable existence I had known was gone, replaced with threats, deception, and financial danger. That's when I realized I couldn't do this alone. I needed help. Someone who could trace the forgeries, follow the money, uncover the truth hidden beneath the ink. I needed a private investigator, someone professional, someone relentless. But even as I made the call, a shiver ran down my spine. What if the trail led to people I loved? What if the very people I had trusted most were the ones behind this crime? My sons, the people I had raised, who had once laughed and cried with me. What if they were the ones who had turned our home into a weapon against us? The thought made me weep silently. I hadn't felt such despair in years, and yet somewhere beneath it, a small flame of determination ignited. I would uncover the truth, no matter how painful. I would fight, not just for Ernest's memory, but for the home we had built, for the dignity of our family, and for the justice that had been so cruelly stolen from us. I began organizing the evidence. Bank statements, letters, loan documents, canceled checks, all spread across the kitchen table. I highlighted each suspicious item, noting dates, amounts, and any irregularities. I was meticulous. I was methodical. And with each note I wrote, the image of the person or people behind this crime became clearer in my mind. And then, just as I thought I might be making some progress, I noticed something chilling. A pattern in the loan amounts, the dates, the way signatures were forged. Someone had been doing this for months, planning it carefully, hiding in plain sight. They weren't reckless. They were confident, bold, and cruel. And they counted on my grief and trust to keep me from noticing. The realization made my hands shake. I couldn't allow this to continue. I couldn't wait for someone else to save me. I had to act. I picked up the phone again, and this time I called a private investigator. I explained the situation, the forged signatures, the loans, the withdrawals. I spoke quickly, urgently, but I also tried to remain composed. The investigator listened carefully, asking questions, jotting down notes. By the end of the call, I felt a tiny spark of hope. Someone else would see what I had seen. Someone else would dig into the truth. But even as I hung up, I knew the fight was just beginning. The pattern had emerged, but the people behind it were still hiding. And the closer I got to the truth, the more dangerous this would become. I sat back in my chair, staring at the stack of papers. The morning sun streamed through the window, but it offered no comfort. Outside, the world moved as if nothing had changed. Inside, my life had been turned upside down. The quiet house, the peaceful streets, the trust I had always placed in family, it all felt fragile, like a thin layer of glass ready to shatter. And I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let them win. Not now. Not ever. I never thought I would feel fear inside my own home. Yet, as I sat at the kitchen table with the papers spread around me, the truth became unavoidable. Someone I loved, or at least trusted, was behind this. The loans, the withdrawals, the forged signatures, it all pointed closer and closer to home. I had to know for certain. So I called Charles first, trying to sound calm, casual even. "Charles, can you come by? I need your help with some paperwork Ernest left behind." There was a pause, the kind that makes your blood run cold. "Mom, I'm busy," he said finally, his voice clipped. "Maybe later?" "No, it's important. Please," I pressed, keeping my tone gentle but firm. He sighed, a sound that told me he knew something I didn't have proof of yet. "Fine, I'll be there in an hour." When he arrived, he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He was tense, careful. We sat at the table and I began showing him the documents, the loans, the withdrawals, the forged signatures. I tried to watch his reaction, looking for any flicker of guilt or fear, but he stayed still, too still, and that terrified me. "Mom, these are mistakes. The bank will fix them," he said finally, his tone sharp now. "You're reading too much into this." I shook my head. "Charles, these aren't mistakes. Look at the signatures. Look at the withdrawals. Someone is using our home without our permission. Someone we know." His eyes flickered, and for a brief moment I saw it, a flash of fear, of recognition, quickly replaced by a mask of calm. My heart pounded. Could it be? Could he? I called Henry next. I needed to see if this pattern repeated. "Henry, I need to talk to you about the bank papers," I said, holding the stack of documents carefully. "Mom, I don't have time for this," he replied immediately. But I pressed, showing him the loans, the numbers, the signatures. He stiffened, arms tightening across his chest. His eyes met mine, and I could see the guilt I had feared. The room went cold. I realized then, with a painful clarity, that my sons had been hiding this from me. Every avoidance, every small excuse, it wasn't careless, it was deliberate. I felt like the rug had been pulled out from under me. The home Ernest and I had built, the life we had nurtured, had been used against us by the very people we had trusted most. The betrayal cut deeper than grief. It was sharp, immediate, and terrifying. I wanted to scream, to confront them, but I knew I needed proof before I could act. Evidence was everything. Otherwise, I would be dismissed, belittled, or worse, no one would believe me. I spent the next few days compiling everything. Each loan, each forged signature, each suspicious transaction went into a detailed folder. I highlighted irregularities, wrote notes in the margins, and cross-referenced them with Ernest's old records. I was meticulous, almost obsessively so. And as I worked, the reality of their betrayal sank in further. My sons hadn't just made mistakes, they had manipulated me, used my grief, and taken advantage of their father's absence to secure money and control over our home. I decided it was time to take action. I needed someone outside the family, someone professional, to verify the forgeries and trace the transactions. I contacted a private investigator, explaining everything: the loans, the signatures, the withdrawals, the strange initials on the documents. The investigator listened carefully, taking notes, asking precise questions. "You're right to act quickly," they said finally. "This is more than just clerical errors. Someone has been deliberately defrauding you. We can trace the signatures and the money flow, but it's gonna take time and discretion." I hung up, my hands still trembling, but with a spark of resolve. Someone had violated the trust between parent and child, but I wasn't going to let it go unchallenged. I would expose them, no matter what it took. The days that followed were tense. Charles and Henry continued to avoid direct answers, but small slips betrayed their guilt. A hurried glance at a bank statement left open on the counter, a nervous cough when I mentioned a transaction. It was enough to confirm my suspicions even before the PI could start uncovering hard evidence. One evening, I sat alone in the living room, looking at the stack of papers and thinking about what I had to do next. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was personal, emotional. The people who should have loved and protected me were the ones orchestrating this nightmare. And yet, beneath the fear, determination burned. I was not going to let them destroy what Ernest and I had built. I began planning my next steps carefully. Each conversation would be deliberate, each question strategic. I couldn't let them know I suspected them fully. Not yet. I needed the proof. And once I had it, I would confront them publicly in a way that left no room for denials. Then another letter arrived, another loan, another signature I didn't recognize. I sank into my chair, realizing that the betrayal was ongoing. They hadn't stopped. They were still trying to manipulate, to control, to take what was rightfully ours. I knew then that time was critical. I had to act quickly, gather evidence, and prepare for the confrontation that would change everything. My son's betrayal had shaken the foundation of my life, but it had also ignited a fire within me. I would not be intimidated. I would not back down. I would fight to protect my home, my family's legacy, and my own dignity. The day the private investigator arrived, I felt a mixture of hope and dread. I had prepared everything for them: files, bank statements, loan agreements, notes on every suspicious transaction. Each piece of paper was a testament to months of careful manipulation, and now it would finally see the light of day. The investigator, a woman named Claire, moved efficiently, her eyes scanning every document with a precision I had never seen before. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. Instead, she asked questions I hadn't even considered. Who had access to these files? Were there any unusual phone calls or emails? Do you know if any of the loan payments were redirected? I answered everything as honestly as I could. I told her about the calls from Charles and Henry, their evasive answers, the little slips that betrayed guilt. I showed her the letters, the forged signatures, the initials that seemed to mock us. Claire nodded as she worked, occasionally jotting notes in a small leather-bound notebook. "These forgeries are very deliberate," she said quietly. "Someone wanted to make sure you didn't notice for months. And based on these transfers, whoever did this was very familiar with your financial routines." My stomach sank. She was right. Whoever had done this had watched us, waited, and struck at the perfect moment, after Ernest's death, when I was most vulnerable. Over the next few days, Claire began tracing the money flow. Each transfer led to accounts that seemed disconnected at first, but she pieced them together with meticulous care. Slowly, a pattern emerged, one that made my heart pound with a mixture of anger and dread. "Mrs. Hayes," Claire said one afternoon, "the funds were routed through multiple accounts, but they all converge on a few primary accounts, and the withdrawals were authorized using what appear to be your son's login credentials." I froze. My sons? All my suspicions were confirmed. They weren't just avoiding questions. They were the ones behind this. They had betrayed me, used my grief, and stolen from the very home Ernest and I had built together. Tears pricked my eyes, but I forced them back. I had to stay strong. I had to plan my next move carefully. This wasn't just about proving they did it. It was about ensuring justice. Claire continued her work, combing through notaries' records, verifying signatures, and tracing the path of every suspicious transaction. "This is all very well documented," she said finally. "We can present this in court. There's enough here to file a lawsuit and prove forgery and financial abuse." I felt a flicker of hope. For the first time in weeks, I believed that I could fight back, that Ernest's death and my son's betrayal wouldn't mean losing everything. But even as we prepared for legal action, a new fear emerged. What if they tried to intimidate me? What if they destroyed evidence or manipulated others against me? The thought of facing them in court, knowing they were capable of such deceit, made my stomach churn. Claire reassured me, "We'll be careful. Everything we've traced is documented and backed by the bank. They can't touch it without leaving a trail." Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped in a nightmare I hadn't asked for. I walked through the house that evening, past the rooms Ernest and I had filled with memories. Every corner felt tainted by the betrayal. Every photo a reminder that the people I trusted most had turned against me. And yet somewhere beneath the anger and grief, determination burned brighter. I wasn't going to let them take the house. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. I would fight, and I would win. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Claire visited daily, tracing signatures, collecting evidence, and advising me on how to handle interactions with Charles and Henry. Every document we uncovered was another piece of the puzzle, another step closer to exposing the truth. Then, one evening, a breakthrough. Claire had discovered a set of notarized documents linking the forged signatures directly to my son's financial activities. The handwriting was analyzed and verified as matching patterns we had suspected. The proof was undeniable. I felt a surge of relief, but it was tempered with anger. How could they do this? How could they manipulate their own mother, their father's estate, for money? I pressed the papers to my chest, the weight of betrayal heavy, yet somehow empowering. Claire looked at me with a steady gaze. "Now we can move forward. You have the evidence needed to file a lawsuit. You have the proof to confront them and reclaim your home." I nodded, swallowing hard. The fight wasn't over, but now I had the tools I needed. The storm was coming, and I was ready to face it head on. That night, I sat alone on the porch, the wind rustling the leaves, and thought about what was ahead. Confrontation, courtroom battles, exposing the lies and forgeries wouldn't be easy. But for the first time, I felt a sense of control returning. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a fighter. And I knew one thing with absolute certainty. My sons would have to answer for what they had done. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since Ernest's funeral. The evidence Claire had uncovered was irrefutable. The forged signatures, the diverted loans, the suspicious withdrawals, it all pointed squarely to my sons. And now it was time to turn that evidence into action. I began by organizing every document meticulously. Each loan notice, every bank statement, every notarized signature went into labeled folders. Dates, amounts, and account numbers were cross-referenced. I even color-coded them, highlighting the most incriminating transactions in red. I wasn't just preparing for a lawsuit. I was preparing for a public exposure that would leave no room for denial. Claire helped me draft a strategy. We'll approach the bank first to ensure they have all documentation on file. Then we'll file the civil case. From there, it's all about timing. You want to catch them off guard, but also make sure you have the full truth ready to present. I nodded, trying to calm the knot of fear and anger twisting in my stomach. This wasn't going to be easy. My sons were clever, manipulative, and, I realized with a shiver, dangerous in their own way. But I had the truth on my side, and that truth was powerful. Over the next few days, Claire and I met with the bank, confirming the fraudulent loans and transfers. Each meeting reinforced my conviction. The bank officials were sympathetic, but they stressed that only a formal legal filing could protect my home and stop any further withdrawals. I made the calls I had been dreading. First Charles, then Henry. Each conversation was carefully calculated, casual on the surface, but probing for hints of guilt. I watched their reactions, noting every hesitation, every nervous laugh, every avoidance. Their answers were slippery, but the investigator had armed me with enough knowledge to remain calm and measured. One evening, as I sat on the porch reviewing the documents, a thought struck me. This wasn't just about money. It was about trust, family, and betrayal. Ernest had worked his entire life to build our home, to secure a stable future for me. And now his sons had tried to destroy that legacy for their own gain. The thought made my hands clench into fists. But I reminded myself, anger could only take me so far. I needed strategy, I needed patience, and above all, I needed proof. Claire suggested I hire a forensic handwriting analyst to confirm the forgeries beyond any doubt. Once we have that report, the evidence is airtight. They won't be able to deny it in court. I agreed immediately. Within days, the analysis confirmed what I had already suspected. The signatures were not mine, nor Ernest's. They had been cleverly forged by someone with access and intimate knowledge of our lives. The report detailed the inconsistencies, the unnatural pressure points, and the subtle variations that exposed the deception. Holding that report in my hands, I felt a surge of empowerment. For months, I had felt helpless, betrayed, and vulnerable. Now, finally, I had the tools to fight back. Next, we prepared the legal filings. The lawsuit was carefully drafted to include every loan, every forged signature, every fraudulent transaction. We cited state laws protecting homeowners against elder financial abuse, highlighting the calculated nature of the deception. I went over the documents again and again, ensuring nothing was missing. While we waited for the filings to be officially submitted, I began preparing for the confrontation. I knew it would be difficult, emotionally and publicly, but I also knew it was necessary. If my sons believed they could hide behind polite avoidance, they would be in for a shock. The evening before the court filing, I sat alone, looking at the house Ernest had built, the porch where we had shared countless quiet mornings, the windows where sunlight had always seemed to dance across the walls. This home represented a lifetime of love and sacrifice, and I wasn't about to lose it. I imagined the confrontation, the courthouse steps, the papers in my hand, the evidence laid bare for everyone to see. I pictured my sons' faces, their bravado cracking as the truth was revealed. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, but it was also strangely satisfying. Claire advised me to anticipate every move. She said, "They may try to intimidate you or even claim ignorance, but with the evidence we have, there's nothing they can do. Stick to the facts, present everything calmly, let the truth speak for itself." I nodded, repeating the mantra in my head: calm, fact-based truth. No emotion, no pleading, no hesitation. This was the final battle for my home, for Ernest's legacy, and for the betrayal that had rocked my life. That night, I hardly slept. I went through every folder again, every highlighted note, every bank statement. Each time the anger resurfaced, but so did my resolve. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a fighter, a protector of the life Ernest and I had built. By morning, the documents were ready. The legal team had filed the complaint. The notice was served to Charles and Henry. I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The storm I had been preparing for months was finally breaking. And yet, as I sat on the porch, the first hints of fear crept in again. How would my sons react? Would they fight back with lies, threats, manipulation? Or would the evidence be so overwhelming that they would crumble immediately? I didn't know, but I did know one thing. I had done everything I could to protect myself and my home. The rest would unfold in the light of truth, and I would be ready to face it. The morning of the court appearance arrived with a gray sky over Spring Creek, matching the heaviness in my chest. I gripped the folders containing every piece of evidence, a lifetime of betrayal condensed into neat, organized stacks. Claire walked beside me, her presence a steady reassurance. As we entered the courthouse, the echoes of footsteps and murmured conversations filled the hall. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my ears, but I kept my gaze forward. This was it. The moment when months of fear, grief, and investigation would finally meet the truth. Inside the courtroom, Charles and Henry were already seated. Their expressions were carefully neutral, polite even, but I could see it, an almost imperceptible tension beneath their calm. They glanced at each other, perhaps realizing the storm they had long ignored was about to hit. The proceedings began formally, the judge calling the case and outlining the matter of forged loans and financial abuse. My hands were steady as I laid out the documents, highlighting the bank statements, notarized papers, and the forensic handwriting analysis. Each piece was a brick in the wall of proof I had built, each one undeniable. As the evidence was presented, I could see my sons shift in their seats. Charles's jaw tightened, and Henry avoided my gaze entirely. The room was quiet, except for the soft rustle of papers and the judge's measured voice. But the tension was palpable, like the air before a thunderstorm. Claire spoke confidently, explaining the pattern of withdrawals, the forged signatures, and the systematic manipulation of the loans. I watched every reaction, every twitch, every faltering smile that betrayed their guilt. The truth had a weight that no lie could match. Then, the forensic handwriting analyst took the stand. She demonstrated with meticulous detail how each signature had been forged, how pressure points, loops, and slants differed from genuine signatures, how the forgeries had been carefully designed to appear authentic, yet failed under expert scrutiny. I felt a surge of vindication. The evidence was irrefutable, and the courtroom air seemed to shift. My son's attempts at casual composure began to crack under the weight of undeniable proof. When it came time for me to speak, I felt the words rise naturally, strong and steady. "These loans," I said, holding up one of the documents, "were never authorized. They were forged, and my home was put at risk by the people I trusted most." The judge nodded, taking note, and the courtroom was silent. I could feel the eyes of the gallery on my sons, the faces of neighbors and townsfolk, a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. This was public, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. Charles tried to interject, to explain, but his voice faltered. Henry shifted uncomfortably, attempting to offer excuses that fell flat against the mountain of evidence. Every argument they made was dismantled by the documents, by the analysis, by the clear pattern of betrayal. I realized then the depth of their deceit. This wasn't a momentary lapse or a misunderstanding. This was calculated, methodical, and personal. They had relied on my grief, on the quiet life Ernest and I had lived, and on the assumption that I would never discover the truth. But I had, and now the community could see it too. When the judge summarized the findings, the courtroom held its collective breath. The forged signatures, the diverted funds, the loans, all pointed conclusively to Charles and Henry. The judge's tone was firm. The evidence presented is compelling. Actions will be taken to rectify the financial abuse and protect the homeowner's rights. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but it was tempered by the knowledge that this confrontation was only part of the process. There would be legal follow-ups, restitution, and consequences. But for the first time, I knew the battle was not only in my favor, it was public, undeniable, and just. Outside the courthouse steps, the town gathered. Neighbors I had known for decades whispered amongst themselves, glances darting between the sons and me. The betrayal was no longer private. It was laid bare for all to see. And that exposure, that public acknowledgement, carried a weight that no apology could ever undo. As I left the courthouse, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and empowerment. Months of fear, investigation, and sleepless nights had led to this moment. I had confronted betrayal with evidence, with patience, and with resolution. And while the path ahead would involve further legal proceedings, the truth was finally visible, undeniable, and unstoppable. I knew my sons would face consequences, both legal and social. The community's awareness of their actions would serve as a barrier against future deception, a reminder that trust, once broken, carries consequences that cannot be ignored. That evening, I returned home, the familiar walls of my house now feeling more like a sanctuary than a trap. The battle wasn't over, but the first victory had been won. The home Ernest and I had built, the legacy of years of work and love, was safe, for now. And as I sat on the porch, looking at the fading light across the small town, I realized something profound. Betrayal can be exposed, justice can be sought, and even in the face of family treachery, resilience and determination can prevail. The fight had been long and painful, but I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more certain than ever that protecting what we love requires courage, persistence, and an unwavering commitment to truth. The days after the courthouse confrontation were a strange mix of relief, anxiety, and vindication. The truth had been laid bare, and the sons could no longer hide behind polite avoidance or thinly veiled excuses. Their betrayal was public, undeniable, and every whispered conversation in Spring Creek reminded me of it. Neighbors I had waved to for decades stopped by cautiously at first. Some brought casseroles, others just offered a quiet nod or a whispered, "I'm so sorry this happened." But slowly, the atmosphere shifted from pity to solidarity. People wanted to help, to stand by me in the face of something no one should endure from their own children. Charles and Henry, on the other hand, were facing a social storm of their own. The courthouse steps had been crowded with onlookers, and even weeks later, the town was buzzing. Friends, colleagues, and distant relatives were whispering about the financial abuse and the forged signatures. Their casual demeanor had evaporated. They were no longer the sons I had raised. They were figures of scandal, humiliation, and consequences. Meanwhile, I had to focus on practical matters. The court had placed temporary holds on any further loans or withdrawals from my accounts. The bank was cooperative, ensuring my home and finances were protected as the legal process continued. But I still had to rebuild the trust that had been shattered, not just in my sons, but in my own sense of security and peace. Claire continued to work with me, tracing every remaining financial trail, ensuring no loose ends remained. Each day, new documents confirmed what we had already suspected, closing loopholes the sons might have tried to exploit. The sense of control, of finally being proactive instead of reactive, was empowering. I began reaching out to the community more intentionally. Small gestures, a cup of coffee with a neighbor, a quick visit to the local grocery store, felt reassuring. Spring Creek had always been quiet and polite, but now it was actively protective. The support reminded me that even after betrayal by those closest to you, the broader world can still offer connection, empathy, and tangible help. The sons tried to maintain appearances, but everyone could see through it. Their interactions in town were awkward, strained. Conversations halted when I appeared. Glances shifted, and the weight of public awareness was palpable. They weren't just fighting a legal battle. They were facing social consequences that would follow them indefinitely. Even at home, I felt a shift. I could walk through each room without the constant undercurrent of suspicion that had plagued me since discovering the loans. I began small repairs, repainting walls, organizing closets, simple acts of reclaiming my space. Every paper I filed, every document I secured, every corner I restored was a step toward healing. Yet the legal battle wasn't fully over. There were still hearings, mediation, and restitution processes to navigate. Claire advised caution and patience, reminding me that while the exposure was public, the financial resolution required diligence. Each session in court was another chance to reinforce the evidence, confirm the forged loans, and ensure my home remained secure. One evening, after a long day of legal preparations, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The sun was setting, casting a soft glow over the small town. I reflected on everything: the grief, the betrayal, the months of investigation, and slowly I realized that I wasn't just surviving, I was rebuilding. Friends and neighbors continued to offer support in tangible ways, helping with groceries, sharing tips on securing finances, and even accompanying me to bank meetings. Their presence reminded me that trust can be nurtured again, outside the walls of family, and that community can be a source of healing when personal betrayal cuts deep. Meanwhile, the son's presence in town became a constant reminder of what had happened. I observed them from a distance at first, seeing the way whispers followed them, the way old friends avoided eye contact, the subtle social isolation that had grown around them. Justice was not only legal, it was visible, public, undeniable. Despite the lingering tensions, I began planning for the future. I wanted to protect the house, yes, but also to reclaim my life. I started small, gardening in the backyard, attending local events, reconnecting with old friends who had drifted away over the years. Each step felt deliberate, a way of asserting control over my environment and my future. Claire and I continued to monitor any financial activity, ensuring that no further attempts at deception could occur. The sense of vigilance was comforting. I knew I had done everything possible to safeguard my home and my peace of mind. The sons attempted to approach me once, nervously, at the grocery store. I kept my eyes level, my tone calm, and refused to engage. The public had already witnessed the evidence. There was no need for confrontation outside the legal arena. I let them stew in the consequences of their own actions. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, life began to feel normal again. I could sit on the porch, drink my tea, and watch the world go by without the gnawing anxiety that had haunted me since Ernest's death. The house, once a place of fear and betrayal, became a sanctuary once more. I knew the sons would eventually have to face restitution and legal consequences, but that was no longer my concern. My focus was on healing, rebuilding, and reclaiming the life Ernest and I had built. And with the community around me, I felt stronger than I had in months. For the first time in a long time, I felt safe. Not just physically, but emotionally. The betrayal had been devastating, yes, but it had also revealed my resilience, my capacity to fight, and the unwavering support of a town that refused to let injustice go unnoticed. And as I looked at the porch lights glowing softly in the evening, I whispered a quiet thank you to Ernest for the home, for the life we shared, and for the strength he had given me to fight for it. The battle wasn't just about money or property. It was about dignity, justice, and reclaiming a sense of trust and peace in the world.
The following weeks were tense. Even though the courtroom exposure had publicly revealed the betrayal, the financial situation wasn't fully resolved. The forged loans, though proven, had left my accounts vulnerable, and the bank still required formal settlements before granting permanent protection. Every day brought letters, notices, and phone calls, each one a reminder that the fight wasn't over. I woke one morning to a notice that made my chest tighten: the possibility of a temporary lien on the house due to unresolved transactions. My stomach sank. Even with the evidence, there was a bureaucratic process to navigate, and it was terrifying to imagine losing the home Ernest and I had built. Claire was calm but firm. "This is normal," she said. "Banks have procedures. It doesn't reflect your guilt or your loss. It's just paperwork. We'll handle it." I tried to trust her, but fear lingered. Walking through the rooms, I imagined losing everything. The house falling into strangers' hands while my sons schemed to claim what they had tried to steal.
The thought made my hands tremble. But I couldn't dwell on fear. I meticulously organized the court orders, the forensic reports, and all communications with the bank. Each document became a shield, a way to defend my home against any lingering threats. I double-checked every account, every transaction, ensuring nothing slipped through the cracks. Then, one afternoon, I received a call from the bank. My heart raced as I answered. "Mrs. Hayes, everything has been reviewed," the officer said. "The fraudulent loans had been reversed, your accounts secured, and your property is fully protected. You are no longer at risk of losing your home." Relief washed over me in waves. I sank into a chair, tears spilling down my cheeks. For months, fear and betrayal had dominated my life. But now, finally, that weight lifted. The house that once felt threatened was officially mine again, safe and secure. Even with this victory, the emotional scars remained. I couldn't forget the months of deceit, the stolen trust, and the betrayal of my own children. But the fear, the immediate threat, was gone. I had faced the storm, gathered evidence, and emerged victorious. In the weeks that followed, the sons attempted to reach out. Their calls and texts were polite, almost cautious, but I didn't answer. The legal battle had been resolved. Their attempts at reconciliation felt hollow. I realized that protecting myself and my home didn't require forgiving them. Not yet. Sometimes distance and boundaries were the only protection against repeated harm. The community support continued to bolster me. Neighbors helped with small repairs, checked in to make sure I was okay, and offered friendship in ways that felt both protective and comforting. I found myself reconnecting with old friends, sharing stories, and rediscovering the simple joys of daily life. The porch became my sanctuary again. Each morning I sipped coffee there, listening to the birds, feeling the sunlight on my skin, and appreciating the security that once felt so fragile. The house, the home Ernest had built, was no longer just a structure. It was a symbol of resilience, a testament to perseverance through betrayal and loss. I also began organizing my financial life with renewed diligence. Locks on accounts, clear records, and careful oversight became routine. I wasn't just protecting the house, I was reclaiming control over every aspect of my life. The betrayal had taught me vigilance, but it had also taught me strength. One afternoon, Claire came by with the final forensic reports and the closure documents from the bank. We reviewed everything together, ensuring all loose ends were tied and that no further attempts could threaten the property. Holding those final papers, I felt a sense of completion. The legal battle, the exposure, the near eviction, all of it was behind me now. I sat on the porch that evening, the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The breeze carried the quiet hum of Spring Creek. The town had returned to its calm rhythm, and so had I. For the first time in months, I felt safe, secure, and at peace. The son's betrayal had been devastating, but the resolution had given me more than safety. It had given me perspective. I had learned that even in the face of familial deceit, persistence, evidence, and courage could reclaim what was taken. I had discovered an inner strength I didn't realize I possessed. And as I watched the last rays of sunlight fade across the roof Ernest had built, I whispered a quiet vow to myself. I would protect this home, cherish the life within it, and never allow betrayal to define me again. The house, once threatened by deception and greed, now stood as a fortress of resilience. Every brick, every beam, every window held the story of survival and justice. And in that quiet victory, I found a sense of closure I hadn't thought possible.
The morning light poured gently through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the living room. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of calm settle over the house. The battles were behind me, the legal threats, the forged loans, the betrayals, and yet I knew that healing was just beginning. Rebuilding trust, restoring my sense of security,
and reconnecting with the community were now my focus. I started small, taking walks around Spring Creek, waving to familiar faces, and slowly reintroducing myself into the rhythms of daily life. The neighbors who had quietly supported me during the crisis offered smiles and small gestures of kindness, a loaf of bread, a cup of coffee, a shared laugh. Those simple connections reminded me that while my sons had betrayed me, the larger circle of people around me cared deeply. At home, I began personal projects I had long postponed. I painted the kitchen walls a warm cream, rearranged furniture, and tended to the garden Ernest had loved so much. Each brushstroke, each planted flower felt like reclaiming ownership, not just of the house, but of my life. I was no longer the passive observer of events. I was active, intentional, and present. Claire continued to check in, not for investigations this time, but to ensure I felt safe and supported. She reminded me that the legal closure was just one part of the journey. Healing would take time, and patience with myself was crucial. The community rallied in quiet ways. At the local bakery, the owner offered a free loaf of bread each morning, saying, "We're glad you're still here. This town is stronger with you in it." At the grocery store, neighbors would stop by, sharing news or simply asking how I was doing. These moments, small as they seemed, became lifelines, proof that trust could be nurtured again, even after betrayal. I also began reconnecting with old friends who had drifted away over the years. Afternoon teas, long phone calls, and visits became opportunities to share stories, laugh again, and remember the joy of relationships built on honesty and love. Slowly, my life felt full again, not the same as before, but renewed in its own way. One afternoon, I found myself walking past the courthouse steps where the confrontation had taken place. Memories of tension, fear, and public exposure swirled in my mind, but instead of dread, I felt pride. I had faced betrayal openly and without fear. I had defended what was mine. The house, my home, and my dignity had been preserved. Inside, the sons were facing the consequences of their actions. While the town no longer focused on them as actively, their social isolation and reputation reminded me that the accountability had a lasting effect. I didn't feel vindictive. I simply felt relief that justice had been served and the truth had been made visible. Back home, evenings became my sanctuary. I would sit on the porch with a cup of tea, listening to the wind rustle through the trees and the distant chatter of neighbors winding down from their day. The quiet, once heavy with anxiety, now felt peaceful and restorative. I began to reflect on lessons learned. Betrayal had shattered my assumptions about family, but it had also strengthened my resolve and expanded my understanding of resilience. I realized that while one could not control others' actions, one could always control their response. I had chosen to confront, protect, and rebuild, and in doing so, I discovered a depth of courage I hadn't known I possessed. To ensure the future, I established clearer boundaries with my sons. Communication was limited to necessary legal matters, and I allowed no further access to finances or property decisions. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Protecting myself and my home required vigilance, and I embraced it with newfound confidence. As the weeks turned into months, the house transformed from a site of fear to a space of renewal. Every repaired wall, every well-tended flower, every organized shelf symbolized resilience. I had reclaimed not just property, but peace. And in that reclamation, I found a quiet joy, one built on perseverance, community, and unwavering resolve. The journey wasn't complete, and scars remained. Memories of betrayal lingered, sometimes visiting in quiet moments.
But each day, I learned to face them without fear, to acknowledge the hurt, and then to redirect my energy toward growth and connection. Finally, one morning, I realized I could sit on the porch without looking over my shoulder, without anxiety clawing at me. I could sip my coffee and watch the sun rise over Spring Creek, feeling the warmth on my skin and the safety of my home enveloping me. I thought of Ernest and whispered a quiet thank you for the life we built, for the lessons of resilience, and for the home that had become my sanctuary. The sun's betrayal had tested me in ways I never imagined, but it had also revealed the strength within me and the kindness and support surrounding me. In that moment, I felt fully present. I had survived grief, deception, and fear. I had fought for justice, protected my home, and reclaimed my life. The house wasn't just bricks and mortar, it was a testament to endurance, courage, and the unwavering pursuit of truth. And as the town settled into its evening rhythm, I realized something profound. Betrayal may wound, but resilience heals. Trust may fracture, but community restores. And life, even after loss and deceit, can bloom again with careful attention, courage, and love.
The house was quiet that morning, the kind of stillness that made me notice every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind through the trees. It was the first time in months that the silence felt comforting, rather than heavy with dread. I walked from room to room, touching the surfaces Ernest and I had cherished, remembering small details of our life together. The way sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, the gentle hum of the washing machine in the laundry room, the faint scent of old books lining the shelves. After everything that had happened, I realized the house was more than just a building. It was a living memory, a repository of decades of love, sacrifice, and shared dreams. The betrayal had shaken me to my core, but it hadn't destroyed that essence. In fact, surviving the ordeal had made me notice the layers of life within these walls. The laughter, the quiet mornings, the shared glances across the dining table. Sitting on the porch that afternoon, I reflected on the months of fear, grief, and confrontation. The son's deceit had been shocking, a betrayal that cut deeper than any legal document could measure. Yet, through it, I discovered strength I hadn't known I possessed. I had confronted the truth, gathered evidence, faced the courtroom, and protected the home Ernest and I had built together. Claire visited to check on me, and we spoke quietly about the resolution of the remaining legal matters. The bank had reversed all fraudulent transactions, the sons had no further access to any accounts or property, and the community continued to offer support. The practical threats were gone. All that remained was healing, and it was mine to embrace. I thought about the lessons this ordeal had taught me. First, vigilance is essential, even in the most trusting relationships. Second, betrayal, while painful, can be confronted with courage, persistence, and careful planning. Third, community matters. People who stand with you can help restore a sense of security and belonging that betrayal seeks to erode. Most importantly, I realized that peace is an active choice. It isn't simply the absence of threats. It is the conscious decision to rebuild, to reclaim your space, your life, and your dignity. Every morning I woke and chose to tend the garden, arrange the house, or simply enjoy the sunlight was a reaffirmation of that choice. One afternoon, I invited a few neighbors over for tea. As we sat on the porch, laughing and sharing stories, I felt the warmth of connection that had been absent for so long. It reminded me that life, even after deep betrayal, could still be full of kindness, companionship, and joy. These relationships, chosen and nurtured, were a balm for the wounds left by deception. I also began journaling, a practice I hadn't done since before Ernest passed.
Writing allowed me to process the grief, the anger, and the relief in a way that speaking aloud could not. Each entry was a step toward understanding, a means of untangling the complex emotions that had built up over months of turmoil. I wrote about Ernest, about the house, about the sons, and about the strength I had discovered within myself. Slowly, I felt a shift. The anxiety that had haunted me began to soften. The fear of losing my home dissipated. Even the memory of betrayal, while still painful, no longer held the power to paralyze me. I had faced it, confronted it, and moved beyond it. Walking through the garden at dusk, I paused to admire the flowers I had planted. They were small, fragile things, yet resilient, just like me. Each bloom was a testament to perseverance, each leaf a symbol of recovery. I realized that rebuilding isn't just about restoring what was lost. It's about creating new life and beauty in spaces that had once felt threatened. I looked at the house, at the porch, at the quiet street of Spring Creek, and felt a profound gratitude. Gratitude for the support of neighbors and friends, gratitude for the guidance and expertise of Claire, and gratitude for the resilience that Ernest had always encouraged in me. Most of all, gratitude for the ability to reclaim my life, my home, and my peace. And I understood something essential. While betrayal can shake your world, it cannot define it. The son's actions were a dark chapter, but they did not determine the story's ending. I did. I chose courage over fear, truth over deception, and rebuilding over despair. That evening, as the sun set behind the trees, I sat on the porch with a warm cup of tea. The sky glowed in shades of amber and rose, reflecting the sense of closure I felt inside. The house, the garden, the life I had fought to protect, all of it was mine. Protected, cherished, reclaimed. I whispered a quiet promise to Ernest, to myself, and to the life we had built together. I would protect this home, honor its history, and embrace the future with vigilance, love, and hope. The storm of betrayal had passed. What remained was the calm after, a life restored not just in bricks and mortar, but in spirit and resolve. And for the first time in a long time, I felt fully at peace.
The morning light filtered through the lace curtains, soft and warm, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't wake with a knot of anxiety in my chest. The house was quiet, the town was calm, and the months of turmoil seemed to have left a gentle, healing trace in every room. I walked through the living room, running my hands along the familiar furniture, remembering Ernest, remembering the life we had built, and realizing how much I had reclaimed, not just the house, but my peace. Looking out the window, I saw the neighbors tending their gardens, children laughing in the distance, and the familiar rhythm of Spring Creek life unfolding. It was ordinary in the most extraordinary way, proof that life, even after betrayal and chaos, continues. And that continuation, when met with courage and resilience, can bring a sense of grace I had never fully appreciated before. I thought back to the courthouse steps, to the moment the son's deceit had been publicly revealed. At the time, it had felt terrifying, raw, almost unbearable. But now, reflecting on it from this calm, I saw it as a turning point. That moment, as painful as it was, had cleared the path for healing. It had reminded me that the truth has power, that courage can dismantle deception, and that even the deepest betrayal does not have to define your life. I had been forced to confront uncomfortable truths, not just about my sons, but about myself. I had learned patience, vigilance, and the importance of documenting and protecting what I held dear. I had learned to accept help, to lean on community, and to value connections beyond family when those bonds falter. Most importantly, I had learned that strength is quiet, persistent, and grows even from grief. The garden called to me, and I stepped outside,
feeling the soil crumble gently under my fingers as I tended the flowers I had planted over the past weeks. Each bloom was a reminder life could flourish again, even in spaces that had once felt threatened or hollowed by fear. These flowers, small yet resilient, mirrored my own journey. Neighbors stopped by, offering greetings and small gestures of kindness, a freshly baked pie, an invitation for tea, or just a friendly chat. I realized that trust, while fragile, could be rebuilt in new ways, not with the sons who had betrayed me, but with a broader circle of people who respected honesty, kindness, and community. This network became my anchor, a reminder that life could continue beautifully despite past wounds. Inside, I revisited the folders of documents, court papers, and reports that had once been weapons in my battle. Now they were symbols of triumph. Each one represented persistence, evidence, and the careful steps I had taken to protect my home and my dignity. I filed them away with a sense of completion, knowing the battle was over, the threats neutralized, and the house truly secure. That evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The sky painted in gentle pinks and oranges. The wind rustled softly through the trees, carrying with it a sense of finality. I thought of Ernest, of the life we had built, and of the challenges that had threatened to destroy it. And I realized something profound. The strength to protect what you love does not diminish with age. It grows. The courage to face betrayal, to act decisively, and to rebuild is always within reach, waiting to be claimed. I reflected on the sons too. While their actions had caused immense pain, the lessons I drew from the experience were mine alone. I had learned that accountability exists beyond punishment, that exposure, community awareness, and legal consequences ensure justice, while personal healing requires choice, reflection, and a commitment to move forward. Their chapter in my life had closed, leaving room for renewal and hope. Slowly, I allowed myself to dream again. Not the naive, unquestioning dreams of the past, but deliberate, mindful dreams grounded in resilience. I imagined inviting friends over, celebrating small joys, and cherishing the quiet moments of connection and comfort. I imagined filling the house with laughter once more, with the aroma of home-cooked meals, with sunlight bouncing off clean walls. And in that imagining, I understood a deep truth. Closure is not a single moment. It is a series of choices to protect, to heal, and to live fully despite the scars left behind. Each choice I had made since discovering the betrayal, each act of vigilance, courage, and rebuilding had brought me closer to this peaceful horizon. I rose from the porch chair and walked slowly through the house, noticing how different it felt. The spaces were no longer shadows of fear. They were filled with light, possibility, and life reclaimed. I paused by Ernest's favorite chair, tracing the familiar fabric, and whispered a quiet thank you for the life we had shared and for the strength he had inspired in me. That night, as darkness fell over Spring Creek, I felt a profound sense of calm. I had faced loss, deception, and betrayal. I had confronted fear with evidence and courage. I had exposed the truth and reclaimed my home. And now, in the quiet, I could finally rest in the knowledge that justice had been served. The community had rallied, and my life was finally, my own. I understood that the house, the garden, and the porch were more than property. They were symbols of resilience, vigilance, and the enduring power of love and memory. I had protected them, nurtured them, and ensured that betrayal could not define them or me. And as I sipped the last of my tea, watching the stars begin to twinkle in the clear night sky, I felt a quiet smile cross my face. Life had tested me, but I had endured. Life had threatened to break me, but I had rebuilt. Life had forced me to confront the darkest betrayal imaginable, and I had emerged whole, vigilant, and at peace. The house stood firm, the garden bloomed, and I knew in the deepest part of myself that I had reclaimed not only the home Ernest and I had built, but also the life, dignity, and inner peace that no one, not even the closest betrayal, could ever take away.